So let's talk about the human side of robotics. We built, I'll tell you about the robots that we built, but I've been with Jim's head for about the last 17 years, involved in creating robots that are intended to be around people. But I want to take you back just for a minute to 19.
Automation was not new to the automobile industry, but this was something different. The Unimate created the definition of an industrial robot.
Would you welcome Joe Engelberger? Joe?
And ultimately, the show that was so important to us was the Johnny Carson show. And that means, one, it could play better golf than Carson could.
Is that wild? You see, in case you get tired and can't make it to the show someday, we can program the machine to do a commercial. Now, what he's doing now is to program what he's going to have the machine do. He's putting this information into the machine. Take it on the downbeat.
So when I hear that people are worried that robots are going to take our jobs, as roboticists, I point out that in 1963 we were inflating all the ways we were going to take the band director's job and the advertiser's job and all the crazy working smart things. But if you the real message here is safety. In spite of the fact that you had an industrial robot, which was very dangerous, on stage next to Johnny Carson, could have killed him. The industrial robots, there's no people involved. So we're talking about humans in robotics. Just when you go back to the beginning and look at the last 60 years of history of robotics, most of it was robots behind safety cages, because safety is the #1 issue about people and robots. And so when we didn't know how to solve it, we just said, keep the robots and people separate. And over the last 20 years, that started to change. It started to change with little tiny robots that are sort of inherently not dangerous and useless. And it started to change actually as early as 1979 with robots that just go really slowly and follow a track. And their whole thing is, if anything gets in my way, just stop. And I'll give you a little clip of that. Which gets to the second point. Safety is one. And then the question, why do you want robots around people at all? You want robots because you want efficiency. So here's your mailbot.
So if you want to see him go out, come back at 2:30. I don't know how, it goes a little way, but I don't know how long it'll go.
How do you and Igor get along?
Fine. Problems sometimes, but it works great. It's better than walking around delivering the stuff. Saves a lot of time. Not much.
Problems.
It'll go offline and it's hard to start up again. See, there's like little tracks right down there, and it's got to be on the tracks or it'll stop and it won't go. It doesn't take long if you know what to do. If you want to see the inside of it, I'll show it to you. See, this will control it if it's offline, and this little light will go on, and that'll show you that it's offline. And then these will tell you how low it is, and you plug it up so it gets juice in it, so that's good. And then it's got the bumpers on it. It's a little broken, but like if...
How do you feel about having a coworker who's a machine as opposed to a person?
It don't really matter. It's less, you can't argue with it. It works the way you want it to. It does what it's supposed to do. It's better, it doesn't have to be paid either. That's good.
This is a perspective on, and these are early deployments. The industrial robots have been very successful, right? So you have growth in industrial robots since the 60s, starting with welding cars. Eventually they welded all cars, painting cars, and then starting to get into other areas. This one was an experiment in can we put robots around people for delivery, and it wasn't wildly successful. There were some of these out there. I think there are still a few, but they've been replaced by much more modern technology that goes faster. So, so it's about the mid 2000s. So 2004, there was something called the DARPA Grand Challenge. Have a car that could drive from LA to Las Vegas completely autonomous. And in 2004, it was a complete failure. No cars made it. Most of them crashed within the first 2 miles. In 2005, they repeated the challenge, and 3 teams actually made it to the finish line. The winner, as you may know, was Stanford Stanley. Second place was Carnegie Mellon. We won because we hired the guy from Carnegie Mellon to come here as a professor, and Sebastian Thrun, and he became the winner. But in 2007, this company started called Willow Garage here in Menlo Park. And the idea was we're going to do autonomous technology, and self-driving cars was actually the first thing. Guinness, it would bring you that beer, but if you asked for a Bud Light, it would say, "Are you sure you want a Bud Light?" This was playing pool, and delivering a beer and playing a pool were both 1-week projects once you had the hardware and the core software. So that was the big thing about this. And this was happening again around 2010, 2011. So just a little over 10 years ago, and that was state of the art. And some of the challenge problems, like can you push a cart with the robot? A lot of these things, people start to take it for granted now. The other thing we learned at Willow Garage is that in robotics, if you see a video, you usually don't want to trust it, right? We can try a demo 100 times, and when it works once, we got that one on video, and then it gets shared. And that was kind of what was happening. And the point of building 20 of these robots was people could repeat each other's experiments and prove that it wasn't just a one-off thing. So a lot of this was about creating software and hardware. This TurtleBot is a very popular platform now. It's a lot cheaper. We built all these systems with the idea that let's let people work together. Let's work on collaboration, and then let's look at home and human scale tasks. One of the tasks. This was one of the workshops. Lots of different videos of this robot. You know, and interestingly today, I think maybe 1 or 2 of the 50 robots that we built like this are still in service. So 10 years, the hardware goes bad. The software has continued to evolve, and continues to be supported, and is the Sun standard. The robot operating system is called ROS, is the standard in robotics. So it's interesting to think like when you create something, we thought, oh, the hardware is so cool. I show this because we worked so hard on computer perception, and all that stuff was terrible because we were waiting for that breakthrough in, foundation models that happened around 2012 when this system was ended. This is pretty cool. Using a cup full of water, you can move it without spilling it. So that's just a little overview of kind of where I came from and back in robotics. But a lot of the thoughts in those days were, how can we put robots around people? How can we make a difference for people? One of the interesting things, we did a whole year-long study. First asked the question, where should we focus? Should we focus on robots in the home, or should we focus on factories? And since factories have been well served by robotics for 50 years at that point, we said, let's look at the home. And we studied the home for a year. What do you think people want in home robots? Or what do you want in home robots? What do you want your home robot to do? Anybody?
I wanted to cook my dinner.
Cook? Yeah.
Ooh, laundry, dishes.
Laundry, dishes.
I wanted to clean.
Clean, yeah. That's fine.
Make my bed.
Make your bed. What came up as the top 3 for us was laundry, dishes, and they wanted to do our homework. which is not really a good use of robots. Right? I mean, it might be from the kid's point of view, but from the parents' point of view, it's not a good use. And interestingly, with laundry and dishes, you already have 3 machines to do those 2 tasks in your home, right? Today, and but it's not enough. Somehow we want more. We're very spoiled. But cost is one of the issues, right? ROS, the robot operating system, won because open source is free. Home robots haven't hit yet because robots that can actually do laundry, the part of laundry that you don't already have a washer and dryer for, right? That means taking the hamper, maybe picking the leaves off the floor and putting them into the hamper, carrying the hamper to the washer, loading it, then moving it to the dryer. By the way, you can get a machine that does washing and drying, right? It's just not as efficient. Taking it out of the dryer, folding, and then putting it back in your drawer. That's a hard task, right? You're not going to get that for you might pay $1,000, $800 for a washer. You're not going to get a robot for $1,000 that can do all the things I just described. So cost is one of the reasons you don't have a home robot. How often do you do laundry? Right? I mean, unless you're really, really dirty, you probably do it once, twice a week, right? That's it. You have a big family, maybe 3 times a week, 4 times, but it's less than once a day. You're going to spend thousands of, tens of thousands of dollars to build a robot to help you with the task. Again, you already have an investment in washer dryer. This is why we don't see robots doing that task in the home. Similarly with dishwashing, slightly more frequent, but again, what's the value? And so cost versus value really is one of those things about do people want to use robots. So we proposed a task that could, we've got this personal robot, it's move around human spaces. So we said, how about this challenge? Pretend like you're a robotic busboy. Clear the table, set the table, and then serve a dish of sushi from a moving platform. We thought that was the challenge part of the problem. We actually had 2 workshops, one in Freiburg in 2012 with a lot of people who had PR2 robots, and they all kind of focused on this problem. And then there was a follow-up at ICRA in Alaska, where we basically just, let's see if we can have the community try to solve this problem autonomously. And the first thing we discovered was that we could solve it using remote control. So people were experimenting with different interface devices that allowed me to control and have the robot mirror what I'm doing. If I look through the robot's eyes and I
hello, I'm mute and quadriplegic. Right, can't talk, can't move his arms, can't move his legs. I'm mute and quadriplegic. I saw your robot on CNN, and I'd like to use that robot as my external body. Can I please try it? And we're like, this is weird, like a weird request. But he lives in Palo Alto, so we invited him down to Menlo Park, and we got to know him a little bit. Turns out he can move his head. So he moves his head, and you put a dot on his glasses with a camera. The camera tracks the dot and maps it to mouse motion. And so Henry's able to move a mouse on a screen, which means he can do an on-screen keyboard. An on-screen keyboard means he can send an email, and that's how he had communicated with me. So that was interesting. We thought, maybe Henry could use the robot. And then we all went our separate ways, went back to work, and then 2 months later, Henry sends me another email with an attachment. And he says, I designed a user interface for me to use with your robot. I really want to do it. Would you please implement this user interface and have me back? This is a really strange request, but Willow Garage was a strange place. We were a think tank. And so we had Henry back a couple months later after we had a student implement the interface. And imagine there's like a table here, and Henry's sitting here with this computer in this wheelchair. And here to the left is the PR2 robot. And so Henry we have a bunch of things on the table for the robots in the midway. And we're thinking Henry's going to reach the arm forward, pick something up. The interface was kind of simple. He doesn't do any of that. He turns the robot's face toward himself, and he starts reaching the arm toward his head. And we're a little bit nervous about this, like we have a big red button we can push to stop it. He brings the arm right in front of his face, then he scratches his itch. But this is what I wanted the robot to do. And we're like, I'm in a headspace where I'm thinking, oh, we're bringing robots out of factories. We're still going to be doing useful tasks. This is a really useful task for Henry. 30 to 40 times a day he gets an itch. Like so much so that he has a gesture with his head that he does for his wife that says, "Scratch my itch." They communicate with really cool stuff. Actually, I'll show you.
Hello. My name is Henry Evans, and until August 29th, 2002, I was living my version of the American dream. I grew up in a typical American town near St. Louis. My dad was a lawyer. My mom was a homemaker. My 6 siblings and I were good kids, but caused our fair share of trouble. After high school, I left home to study and learn more about the world. I went to Notre Dame University and graduated with degrees in accounting and German, including spending a year of study in Austria. Later on, I earned an MBA at Stanford. I married my high school sweetheart, Jane. I am lucky to have her. Together, we raised 4 wonderful children. I worked and studied hard to move up the career ladder, eventually becoming a chief financial officer in Silicon Valley, a job I really enjoyed. My family and I bought our first and only home on December 13th, 2001. A fixer-upper in a beautiful spot of Los Altos Hills, California, from where I am speaking to you now. We were looking forward to rebuilding it. But 8 months after we moved in, I suffered a stroke-like attack caused by a birth defect. Overnight, I became a mute quadriplegic at the ripe old age of 40. It took me several years, but with the help of an incredibly supportive family, I finally decided life was still worth living. I became fascinated with using technology to help the severely disabled. Head tracking devices, sold commercially by the company Modern Tech, convert my tiny head movements into cursor movements, and enables my use of a regular computer. I can surf the web, exchange email with people, and routinely destroy my friend Steve's cousins in online word games. This technology allows me to remain engaged, mentally active, and feel like I am a part of the world. One day, I was lying in bed watching CNN when I was amazed by Professor Charlie Kemp of the Healthcare Robotics Lab at Georgia Tech demonstrating a PR2 robot. I emailed Charlie and Steve Cousins of Willow Garage, and we formed the Robots for Humanity project. For about 2 years, Robots for Humanity developed ways for me to use the PR2 as my body surrogate. I shaved myself for the first time in 10 years. From my home in California, I shaved Charlie in Atlanta. I handed out Halloween candy. I opened my refrigerator on my own. I began doing tasks around the house. I saw new and previously unthinkable possibilities to live and contribute, both for myself and others in my circumstance.
So you get the idea. It's pretty amazing. And over 10 years, actually 12 years now, since 2013 when he gave that TED Talk, he's managed to survive, which is an amazing thing, right? If you're mutant quadriplegic, to be 20 plus years out from the event that caused it is pretty amazing. And that's him on the right on the cover of IEEE Spectrum magazine with a new robot. It's a smaller robot that Charlie Kemp, who we mentioned in the video, actually left his tenure at Georgia Tech, gave up his lab, and he's the CTO of this company that's making a smaller version. Because the challenge with the PR2 was, again, 500 pounds doesn't really fit in a home. It barely fit through his bedroom door. And so it was amazing what he could do with it, but it was, and it was loud, had a lot of fans. So this robot is much more acceptable. The coda to the story is Henry recently had his granddaughter over to his house, and his granddaughter typically would ignore him because she viewed him like a piece of furniture. He's just sitting in the chair, he's not moving. But he started using this robot to play with her. And when she went home after that, before she left, she gave him a hug. So that's kind of the coda to the story. The other interesting sort of thing that came out of Willow Garage was this telepresence. And it seemed like a great idea, right? Henry used a robot like this for his talk. This is the original version that was built by a guy who lived in Indiana, but he wanted to work in California. And he wanted to be part of the group. And so we would see him walking down the, well, before he built this robot, I knew that we had a person in Indiana, but I had no idea what he looked like or anything about him. And after we had the robot, he's wandering down the hall, and you'd pass him and go, "Hey, Dallas," and he'd say, "Hey, Steve." And so you'd like, it's just normal hallway interactions, which is amazing in terms of making just, you feel like you know somebody. And then this robot was also turned out to be the same robot. We leased it to the studio that did the Big Bang Theory. So this was the Sheldon bot, if you ever see that episode. But it wasn't successful, right? This robot, Scott Hassan, who's got a lot of money and had funded Willow Garage himself completely, went off and funded this company called Suitable Technologies to build this beam. They called it the beam, this telepresence robot. And in the end, it was not successful, right? And why? It's timing, right? He started it around 2013, 2012, and by 2019, they shut it down because in that same time period, smartphones appeared, right? You don't realize like history is changing, and like there was no Uber 15 years ago. Like you don't it's amazing how fast things are changing. Now we're like, well, Uber's old school. We use Waymo, right? But this is like, in 20 years we went from nobody could have a self-driving car, even in a research challenge, right? The DARPA Grand Challenge in 2004, no cars finished. In 2005, 3 cars finished. The winner was Stanford. Woo! And 20 years later now, you can take Waymos in starting in more than one city. But it's taken a long, long time. But cell phones and Zoom came along, and suddenly, why do you need to have a robot wandering around? And this actually is one of the challenges with robots. Michelle and I have this discussion all the time. Oh, we could build a robot for this, but we could also do it this way, and that's much easier, right? And so not everything is a robot solution. The question is, where are robots going to help? So there's a lot of people interested in social robots. Loneliness is a huge problem. I think Michelle will say more about this. But if I look at this picture, Dan mentioned the Aro, this robot seal, which has somehow survived for a long time. There's some anecdotes about the robot seal that in Denmark, an older woman had stopped talking, and they gave her this Paro seal, and she started talking to it. And then eventually she started talking to her family. So that's not a study, that's an anecdotal story, but it's those kind of stories that get people thinking, oh, this might be really cool. But Cynthia Brazil got a lot of money for Jibo, burned through a lot of venture capital, and the company went under. This is Kai-Jin Chow, who was at Willow Garage with her little robot Curry, that also was short-lived. We have a bunch of them. I have one in my office. Pepper was a robot that SoftBank put a lot of money into. The idea was, oh, this is going to be a social robot. And there was a huge wave of, there was even a developer tent at one of the big robotics conferences just around Pepper. But in the end, it was like this tall with a screen on it, touch screen. The speech interface was bad because it was too early. And the thing was broken all the time. And when it turned off, the head would be like this. So we went to the developer pavilion at the end of the day, and all the batteries were dead, and all these robots looked dead. One of the developers of that robot is now doing this company called Enchanted Tools, which we have one in the robotics center. It's getting better. This robot, it's frustrating. Michelle can tell you more about it, but at least it does inherent mirroring. So if you're interacting with this robot and you tilt your head, it will tilt its head. You're being seen. Sometimes it's a little slow on the uptake with AI delays and stuff. But all these robots, all these social robots, and then the one in the upper right, you may have seen the Amazon Echo. But all these other robots are thousands and thousands of dollars, and the Amazon Echo is like $150. You can get the Dot for pretty much for free. And so, what do I need a social robot for? How do I get over the hump? Does it actually, do any of these help me with loneliness? I've been talking to Alexa for years, doesn't help. But the alternatives is always the interesting question. Okay.
But that doesn't happen that way every single time. I think Favre's accomplishments, they speak to
What's it? Oh, we open the door.
Is it Wally? Papa, let's see. Oh
Look, it's Wally.
my god, it's Wally! Let's see. Oh my god.
It says hello. Remove your delivery, it says.
Please remove your delivery.
Wally, the butler.
Wow.
Okay, get it out, Julie. What does it have?
I want to see. Oh my god. Thank you, Wally. Thank you. I believe this gateway is for you.
Put it on the counter.
This is so cool.
And when you're done, it says hit all set the green button, Julia. It's all empty.
What's that?
How was your stay? Give him 5 stars.
5 stars. Oh! 5 stars. Yay.
He says yay.
Thank you. I think.
Do you want anything else?
Anything else? An assistant? No. With anything else? Okay, I'm heading home. Goodbye, oh my gosh.
Look, he said bye.
Bye.
Oh my god.
Heading home. Bye. Bye.
He blinked. There he goes.
Oh my gosh.
Look, there he goes.
You can see we were trying to literally design delight. And this is the biggest problem with putting robots in hotels turned out to be elevators, of all things. This was our attempt to solve that problem, which is another interesting human-robot interaction thing. So we built this little delivery robot called Relay, and the idea was, okay, it can deliver to your hotel room. You can bring stuff. And when the first question was, okay, in order to get to your hotel room, you have to ride the elevator. Are people going to be okay with that? Right? So where do you stand to wait for the elevator? When you get in the elevator, where do you stand? So we designed this whole system where when the robot would stand off to the side because you got a lot of people exit, delay a little bit, door open, and the robot's in control of the elevator. So we had to do a wireless interface to the elevator. So we could tell it, okay, come to the first floor, and when the door opened, we would say, hold the door. Now we have plenty of time to make sure everybody's out, and we would get in, and then we would turn to face the door. Doors would close, and we would stand there very quietly until it got to our floor, and then when the doors opened, we would say, hold the door, and we would get out, and everybody was okay with that. It wasn't like a big problem. And then we tried, it turned out to be a big problem to get integration with the elevator for a bunch of reasons, and you can imagine what happens when you lose connection with the elevator while you're riding it. So I don't have connection to the elevator, the door's open, should I get off or not? I don't know what floor I'm on. So we have to do all kinds of cool engineering hacks, and we get it to work. But eventually we decided it takes too long and too much money to integrate with the elevator wirelessly because you have to go through the elevator company, they have to do the work. So we're going to try to push the buttons. And so now the story changes a little bit. So now instead of standing right next to the elevator door, I have to go over here, push the hall call button. Push the hall call means in the hall where the elevators are. Push the hall call button. Now I'm going to wait for the car to come. All right, so where should I stand? Should I stand here? But there's actually 4 cars. So I need to go stand over here and somewhere where I can watch all of them at once. I find some pose where I can see all the cars at once. Now the elevator door opens. But I don't have an easy entrance. I'm not holding the door. I got to run, right? So the robot is suddenly much more aggressive. You get 8 seconds, it turns out, from the time the door opens till the door closes. And you have to spot it in that time. And if you push the hall call button, let's say the hall call button between cars, push the hall call button and I go over to my spot. At this point, I'm blind. I don't see that the door just opened. I get here and I go, oh, the door's open. And I go back and the door's closed, right? And then I look like an idiot, right? As a robot. Because people are like, well, you missed your car. And that's just to get into the car. Once you get into the car, you can't stand still. You have to go push the buttons, right? Because that's the only way you can control the elevator. So the other people in the car are like, this thing's not standing still, it's moving around, what's it doing, right? And so in the end, we pulled this thing off the market because people didn't like it. It was too aggressive, it was moving around in a small space with them, which is uncomfortable space anyway. And so I'm not saying it can't be done, but first generation, we made it functionally work. We could do deliveries. We deployed this in 12 hotels, but eventually we pulled it out. I always put Roomba up just because it's like the only home robot, right? But you do see robots in life if you look for them. This looks like a floor cleaner. It looks like a ride-on floor cleaner with a handle. But it turns out there's a company in San Diego that automates these floor cleaners. And they do a brilliant human-robot interaction thing. I don't know how I'm doing on time, by the way. Okay. They do a brilliant human-robot interaction thing because it's a janitor who's going to be using this robot, and it's going to be navigating around people. So we already know if you kind of move slowly and you stop for people, people will all jump in front of you to see whether you'll stop. But if you do stop, eventually they'll get bored. Like nobody will just stand in front of you for an hour. They'll stand there if you're waiting, and this robot basically is trying to do a cleaning path. So it can go around obstacles, but often it will wait for a while, and it's fine. The way that works with the person who's using it, so the other user is the janitor. The janitor gets on and puts it. There's somewhere in the store they'll put a QR code on the wall, and they pull the robot up next to the QR code so that the camera can see the QR code. Now it knows it's at the starting location. Then the janitor gets on, pushes record, and basically drives. And then it uses all kinds of sort of standard robotics navigation tricks to record all the walls and everything that it sees, and it remembers the path. And when it's done, it says, what do you want to name that path? And you say, well, I'm going to name that the fruit section, right? Okay, fruit section of Walmart. So now it's going to clean the floor of the fruit section. And next time I pull up to that QR code, it gives me an option of 4 or 6 paths that I've recorded. I push the button and it goes and does it. And then I can get off and go do other work, right? So it will do the boring driving around in circles and let other people do things. And this one actually is fairly successful. Walmart's got a bunch of these. They're in grocery stores and things. So just another example of robots you may see in your life that you don't realize are there. This is a very subtle one. This is a woman from Japan who works for IBM Research, and she's blind, and she designed a robot in a suitcase form factor. So basically, it's got all the sensors of a robot. It's got a little bit of motors so it can move itself, and it's got haptics in the handle so she can feel obstacles and things. And then she just walks with her thing, and it looks more subtle. Now, interesting thing, there's a student here, an undergrad, we've been walking. What's the project called? BIM. There's a project called BIM. And what they did is they gave you a handheld, a replacement for the white cane, right? And they found something very interesting. The handheld device will give you, like, you can simulate all the haptics of taps pretty well, and give the sight impaired user the ability to navigate through the world nicely with this thing. But there's no white cane anymore. So the people around don't realize that this person is sight impaired, and they might run into you, right? They might, like, if you see somebody with a white cane, you're going to give them a little bit of a wide berth. That's a signal. The white cane is a signal to the rest of the people. We've taken away that signal. So this is, again, to Dan's point about, when you put technology in, you've got to think about the alternatives. All right, I think at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Michelle and talk about the future of senior living. And actually, I'll do this slide, and then I'll turn it over to Michelle. Because when I started at 2 years ago at the Stanford Robotics Center here, we have a space dedicated to domestic robots. And so thinking about domestic robots, and everybody says, what do you want in a robot for the home? Oh, I want robots to do my dishes. You have a machine for that, but okay, I want more help, I get it. I want robots to do the laundry. We have 2 machines for that, but I need more help, we're lazy. And the third one, kids always say, I want robots to do my homework, which is a bad idea, and you have ChatGPT, right? So how much time do you actually spend doing laundry and dishes, right? You do like add it up in your house. Like it's just not a full-time job, right? And so you're going to get a $100,000 humanoid robot that's going to fall on you. Sorry. And you know, to try to do these tasks, and you're going to do that because you've got 4 hours of work per week max that you want it to do for you. No way, right? It's got to do more. And the real answer is caregiving. As soon as you have caregiving going on in the home, you have a new like 24/7 need for help. And it doesn't have to do everything because there can be another caregiver. But if you can take a load off the spouse who is the effective caregiver, you can make a big difference. So I started off thinking, okay, we want robots to do the activities of daily living, like washing, dressing, feeding, and asking how many of these cases can robotics help with? Can we actually make them do these things safely? And if we focus how can robotics help with this problem in the next 10 years? And Michelle joined and started asking the question slightly differently, and I'll let her tell that story. But we are very focused on robots for older adults as one of the core areas of the Stanford Robotics Center. And it's a very human AI, human robotic problem. So, Michelle. I do questions at the end, I guess. How much time? I don't know how much time.
We have whatever this says. 31 minutes and 42 seconds.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
Okay, so as Steve said, caregiving is a big issue. If you think about it, the baby boomers right now are turning 80. So there's a graphic here that shows by the time we reach the year 2060 that basically a quarter of our population is going to be an older adult. So we want to design robots to help our older adults, not just because there's a huge number of them, but because the number of people we're going to have who can help our older adults, that gap is really changing. So there's a graphic here, it's a little hard to see, but if you look back to 1960, the blue that you see there shows that we had 6 working adults, so people who are between the ages of 18 to 64 per adult who's 65 and over. We have really changed. We're already now at about 3 people who are able to do caregivers for every 1 older adult, and that number is continuing to decrease. So this is some of the motivation we have for why we think we would like to look at how robotics can help older adults. So we have a project now at the Stanford Robotics Center that we're calling SOAR. SOAR is Stanford Older Adult Robotics. And the way we're actually approaching this problem is to not just start out and say, we are sure that we're going to help you with the activity for daily living, but let's take a really close look at what the needs are that our older adults have. And it's not just the older adults by themselves, because older adults do not live just by themselves. They are part of a constellation of a family of that includes your caregivers, includes your medical team. So you really need to think when you're designing systems that would work for people, how it works for kind of the whole entourage, the whole group together. So we've been doing a survey as to what the current enabling technologies are that are in use by older adults. And those can range from anything from your walker to something like Alexa, to possibly glasses, hearing aids. Those are all problems that we face as we get older. We're surveying what the current robotic capabilities are, and then we're looking at where in that intersection might we be able to make a difference. So I like to actually think here, and this is a bit what Steve was getting at when he talked about the original focus for the project and where we've moved to. You can think when you talk about how we can help older adults with their needs, about how you can assist people with the limitations that they have. So a really good example here would be the walker or the wheelchair. I have a problem with my mobility. Is there a device I can use so that I can get around? But we can also think, and here we have at Stanford as the Stanford Center on Longevity. We actually have a collaboration with them. We have a postdoc who's just joined us. And one of the things they think about the Center on Longevity is how can we actually have scaffolding for healthy aging? So we're all living longer lives. So across a lifespan, you can think about what the implications are, even starting from at a very young age. How do we actually plan for having these longer lifespans? So we can actually think about how we can have systems that could be more proactive rather than just reactive. So an example here in this mobility space might be if I have an exercise app, maybe that's something that encourages me in my walking. So very often the needs of older adults get characterized across different categories. The first slide that Steve had was really very much about daily living and independence. And of course that becomes very important if you want to stay at home. And the AARP has done studies. Most people do prefer to stay living at their own home for as long as possible. We have questions of physical health and mobility. Social, cognitive, and mental health is such an important area of concern for older adults. You start losing the people you've been close to, your world gets a little smaller. How do you stay engaged? We can think about environment and safety. So very often, one of the first things that happens is you start having physical challenges, is you need to put like a grab bar in your bathroom. There are a whole bunch of ways in which we can make our environments safer. And all of us really at some point in our lives probably may need some rehab or some therapy. That becomes more of an issue where we're just more likely to have problems like that as we age. So we're looking at the robotics center at these different categories. We're thinking about not only assistive robotics, but what you could call wellness robotics. And so I'm just going to take a deep dive because we can't cover everything in our as we're kind of at the initial stages of this project. So we decided to look more at this area of wellness robotics. We've been really struck in the literature by a couple different facts. So if you look at older adults and exercise, there are studies that show that consistent physical activity in adulthood is linked to like just better health. So in fact, to a 30 to 40% lower mortality risk. Okay, that's great. We all know we should exercise, but who really does exercise? I think here in the Bay Area, we have such an exercise culture. We don't necessarily always realize that there are a lot of physically inactive adults. So if you actually look, the CDC has done a study. If you look at the percentage of physically inactive adults in the United States, ages 50 and up, you know, somewhere in the range of 20 to almost 40%. And that number is really affected by whether or not you have one or more chronic diseases. Okay, another thing to think about is older adults and loneliness. Loneliness, not good for our health. Loneliness increases the risk of dementia by 31%. There's a statistic that's associated with 100 deaths an hour. But how are we doing? This is not just about older adults. This is currently sadly, it's a widespread phenomenon that hits people of all ages. COVID was not at all helpful for this. So this is a graphic that shows how changes in feelings of social isolation. This is among adults ages 50 to 80, but we're also seeing this in young adults, in teens, and tweens. So this is something that we, as a society, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could find a way to help with that? So that's our question. Is there a way that robotics can help for older adults in this space? So if we look at the merits and the need for exercise, the need for social connection, our question is, well, what if we had a walking companion robot? How could we design such a thing? So for starters, we want to talk to seniors, again, to caregivers, to senior living staff, so we can understand what are their pain points, what does stop people from getting out and walking more often. We want to see what's out there. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this. This is something that's out there with a little bit of addition by us. Let's take what's out there. Let's see how can we improve it. Let's try some new things. And as we try these new things and we see what's out there and is ready to use, let's go out to our older adults. Let's find out how they would respond. Let's see what works for them. And then let's iterate. So we're at the beginnings of this project right now. We have a couple master students who are going to be working with us on some new hardware designs. We have a postdoc who's going to work on some robotic smarts like navigation. And we have some robot toys. That I'm going to show one of them to you. Let me see what on this. Let me just say a little bit about who our local senior communities are, and then I'm going to talk about this guy. So it turns out there are a lot of different kinds of settings in which seniors either go for socialization or actually live at, or go to spend time to give their caregivers a break. There are also seniors who are living independently. So at the Stanford Robotics Center, we think it's really important to make connections to all these different types of communities. So I just have a short list here. There are many more. I mean, I'm actually amazed at how many different senior living configurations and settings we have just within a few miles radius of where we are. So in fact, next week, we're actually going to have some folks from the Channing House, which is here in Palo Alto, come to give us what we're calling a mobility device clinic. So there are walkers, there are canes, there are some people like trekking poles. How do people make decisions on what to use and when? I'm going to come back to this, but let me just show you what this is. This yellow face, to which we've added a rig, Comes to us from a company called Piaggio Fast Forward. It's a pretty simple robot. It's sold. You can buy it. It's relatively inexpensive. It's a cargo carrying robot, so kind of like these like lunch delivery robots you might see roaming around on sidewalks and places. And it knows how to follow you. So I'm going to just quickly demo that part of it. I'm going to come. It's got cameras. It doesn't know me. Anybody can come up and do it. I'm going to hit the top, and now we have a self-balancing robot. Will follow me around. When I walk around campus, I also find I get a lot of attention when I do this. So there's one way of making social connection. And I'm going to talk about what's on the rig in a little bit. I just wanted to give you that as a starting point. So when we think about outdoor walking, and you will see that this robot does not address all the things I'm going to talk about, but it's a great starting point for conversation. We took this robot to the forum at Rancho San Antonio, which is a continuing care community. And a bunch of the seniors came running up to try, what's that? It looks so fun. It's very cute. And someone said, let's do our photo with it. Well, there was one woman there who she did not want to be in the photo. Why did she not want to be in the photo? She was not camera shy. She was robot shy. Why was she robot shy? She was really, really worried about falling. She was really anxious that this robot might bump into her. In the end, I think the excitement of being near it, she just stood really far back and she was in the photo. But worries about falling are very well founded. It turns out that 1 out of 4 US adults over 65 reports falling in a given year. Once you fall, it doubles your chances of falling again. Once you fall, you're actually much less likely to want to get up and to move. And that's a real problem because then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? You become weaker, you're actually more likely to fall. In fact, falls are the leading cause of both fatal and non-fatal injuries for this age group. I think 37% of falls pretty much take you to the hospital. Along with those worries about falling, then what can people do? There are a lot of mobility assistance needs in this population. So almost a quarter of US adults, older adults, use at least one mobility device. Again, that could be your cane, that could be your walker. But sadly, mobility devices have an image problem. My own dad really should be using some kind of support, but he doesn't really like to be seen with it. I think that's a pretty common perception. And so how can we get around that? I'm reminded of how, for example, curb cuts are a classic example that those were done for basically accessibility. And it turns out that we all like curb cuts, and that ends up being something that's useful for the whole population. So wouldn't it be great if we can have an outdoor walking companion that's maybe a little bit cool that everybody might like to use? This particular robot handles some kinds of terrain really nicely. So we've taken it to the Rodin Sculpture Garden where there's gravel, handles that okay, can go over grass, can take some incline, but it's really not going to be able to handle a curb. So that is an issue, not just for our robot, but for anybody with a walker. Another reason why you might not want to take it is you have to be able to handle getting up your curb with your walker. You've got to be able to get around in your terrain. And so that is an issue. Sometimes people get lost. This isn't just older adults. I've been known to get lost myself, even in places I've been before. So that is an issue that may stop people from walking. And sometimes we also just need motivation. So if you remember that statistic, a lot of people are physically inactive. Sometimes you need some motivation to get out. One of the ways, of course, in which people find reasons to get out is other people. But, it can be hard to find a companion to go out with you. So, everybody seems to be busy. If you're an older adult and you'd like to do more with your kids, maybe they don't live close by, maybe they're at work during the day. But it can also be really hard to make new human social connections, especially as you get older, you get a little bit set in ways. Notably, pets can be a wonderful thing. I have a dog myself. My dog makes sure that I get out with my dog every day, pretty much. I also find I meet new people when I'm out with my dog. I think we can take lessons from this as we design robotic systems that get people out and moving and hopefully making some social connections. One question is, if I'm out and I'm walking and maybe I have a robot, what will we talk about? And so what I have on this rig is a first answer to some of what you might want to do. I bring this up. We have a so when I put the screen on here, I guess it could have a face. And I think at one point I tried having a face. And guys, no, I'm not really thinking of this robot that's coming with me, cute as it is. I don't really want to anthropomorphize it that much. What's actually practical? And practical seems to be having a map. So right now there's a map interface on here that localizes to where you are. So you're showing where we are here in this lecture hall. It's associated with a little chat bot. The chat bot is location aware, and this is a little bit of an answer to what might I want to talk about while I'm out walking. One suggestion might be to really understand the place, to be very situated with where I am. So this is a real prototype. This Ray was just for us to experiment with. There's a camera on the end of this. So despite what Steve said about being in telepresence, for this robot, we think in this population, we think it might be really nice to be able to walk with somebody else who maybe isn't physically present and able to be with you.
Well, just to add, if you zoom on your cell phone, that's all fine. But if you're worried about falling down, you're not going to walk around like this. You're going to be holding on to your
So I'm going to switch gears a little bit from this robot, and then I'm going to come back to it later for what some of the ideas are we have for a next generation of it that won't necessarily involve this hardware platform. Although I will say we have access to an API for this robot, and right now you saw that it follows me. We're very curious about what it would mean for this robot to be able to lead you. Again, we have this potential problem of getting lost. Maybe it would be a wonderful thing for the robot to be able to help with that. We've done other experiments. Again, we're looking at what our current robotic capabilities are and how they may be used to address these questions of getting people moving. So I'm just going to show you an example of using one of the relay robots that you saw doing the really cute hotel delivery with the excited little girl. We have one of those over in Gates. So for a starting experiment, we thought, wouldn't it be interesting to see if this robot, which has this embodied presence, could somehow get us to move more often. Let me just play the video. So this is over in Gates. Robot is coming over to Steve's in my office. When it gets close, it's not actually going to give us a delivery right now. Instead, it's going to remind us about how important it is to walk. It's making these cute little sounds. It turns out there's a whole phenomenon that's been studied about micro exercise. I mean, all of you who've just been sitting here, I'm glad that you're going to get up and walk to your next class after this. Turns out even little snatches of movement are very beneficial for your health. So this robot has just asked if we want to go for a walk. The idea is that this would be somewhat social. So back in, I don't know, maybe Xerox Park days, you could go to the water cooler and have a conversation. That doesn't happen so much anymore. So this robot actually has gone and made a circuit and in hopes of railing other people to come on the walk with us. And when we get back, we do get presented with some water, although we have an old version of the robot where the cargo heats up. So the water's not quite so refreshing, but kind of get the idea. It also turns out that because of remote work, we don't have that many people on our hallway right now. So we don't tend to get other people coming around. But we talked about this with the CEO of Channing House, who said that there is a group of people at Channing House that likes to take walks together. And it turns out at Channing House, they have like a rooftop, which is quite extensive. And people who don't feel comfortable going because of maybe the terrain or the fear of falling, they walk together on the rooftop. And the question is, how do you actually get a walk started? And so I could have a reminder to go for a walk that comes on my watch, that comes on my phone. It's really hard to ignore the elephant in the room when the robot comes by and says it's time for a walk. So the question is, when does it matter if you're embodied in a congregate setting, like a retirement community where people are living? Sometimes you need someone to make the first move. That can be a hard thing just if you think about social norms. So maybe this is a way a robot could be a little bit disruptive. And Rhonda at Channing House is game for us to bring the relay robot and try that. Okay, so I showed you already a little bit about how Rosie works. I don't know if I mentioned we named this one Rosie. Some of you might know the Jetsons, although it's from a long time ago. It's before my time, so I wasn't thinking about Rosie when I named it, and then somebody had to tell me about it. Rosie is the robot for outdoor socially interactive exercise. You can ask if it's a good idea to give something a name, right? Because it kind of makes you think about the kinds of interaction you could have with it. We do find when we take this robot out, I think in this day and age where we all have like voice activated chat bots, if people assume they can talk to this robot, it does not have any kind of interface like that. Now, well, when it's augmented with this iPad, it does have a chatbot you can talk to. But when we're taking out a robot without a rig, people talk to it like it's an animal, which is very interesting to see how people interact with it. So we've used Rosie again with telepresence. So I talked a little bit about that. You could basically do Zoom on your screen, and now you're out taking a walk. Steve and I did this soon after we got the robot. It was pretty cool. He came with me to the Rhode Island Sculpture Garden. We still kind of remember like we did that walk together. Pardon?
Except that I wasn't there.
Except you weren't there. Yep, he was. Well, he was there. He was there on the screen. So it starts to conflate your notions of what it means to do something together. Again, we're talking about having a location-aware conversational chatbot on there right now, but what are we going to do next? So again, we're at really the starting points. We're doing these initial experiments to see what the ranges of experiences that we might be able to provide while we're simultaneously having these conversations with people in the senior communities about what they would find useful. What would it take to get out and moving, because we know it's really good for you. So we keep hearing about falls. Every place we go, people are telling us about their falls. This is especially apparent if you go to one of the centers where we have adults with cognitive limitations. So Steve and I visited one, and it was really quite striking that at this particular place, everyone sat around a table. So this is an adult day center where people just go for the day to give their caregiver a break. And because of their staff ratio, they just find it easier for everybody to sit in place rather than having people moving, because then you have to worry about how people are going to get around, and if someone's going to fall, then that takes staff attention away from the rest of the group. So it seems clear that the next generation of this robot, we would like to be able to have it lend some degree of mobility or balance support. We'd also really like for it to be able to handle urban terrain. Again, it would be great if it could at least get over a curb. On the software side, one of our design challenges is looking at how you would do the design for, and this is a human robotic interaction problem. Does it make more sense for my robot to lead me, for it to follow me, for it to go side by side? And if you look at how people walk together, there's actually a lot of subtleties to it. So if I'm walking on a crowded sidewalk side by side with someone, and we come up to other people who are coming in the other direction, we kind of have natural ways in which we move to handle this. So we might, go single file. It might always be someone who takes the lead. And so you can look at how people actually move to think about what you would want your robot to do. One of the other losses is the robot isn't necessarily just like a person, right? So we might be able to have more of an expectation that, for example, that the robot might always go behind us. The ways in which robots interact with us, it's also very interesting to consider from a natural language point of view. So we have the Enchanted Tools robot that Steve showed, the kind of cute little orange fox-like robot at the robotic center. And it responds, it's a social robot, so it responds to conversation. And it does let you know, again, with that mirroring, whether or not it's attending to you. And in fact, it's got little ears that wiggle to let you know it's listening to you. But it's very hard to have that robot be part of the conversation, because whenever you speak, it thinks that you might be talking to it, even if you're really trying to talk to the person next to you. And we don't really treat it as a full-fledged member of our conversation. We have the sense, just like if you're watching a TV program or a movie, you might want to do an aside to the person you were the real human companion. We have kind of a second-class citizenship for robots and for technologies. And so I think that there's a lot to be done to take that into account. Because of this issue around falling, we have some interesting designs hardware-wise we're looking at that might be able to actually prevent you from falling, possibly by having some kind of a halo to encircle you. But even if not, just having some responsiveness to falling. Back to this assisted living group that does walking together at Channing House. One of the issues right now is that they always have to have a staff member present when this group goes for a walk, just in case somebody falls. And so when we talked to Rhonda about this, she said she would actually love to have a robot, not only to initiate walking, but just to be able to report back. So being able to do some monitoring of your safety. If you're out walking, we could watch your gait, for example. We could tell if you're starting to slow down. Is there a reason? Should we actually ask you about returning? If it's been a long time, should we ask you about going back? But there's always this trade-off to consider, because nobody wants to have surveillance, right? So one of the first questions people ask when we talk about these robots coming into these senior living settings is, I don't really want it watching me. And so you have to really think about this balance that you can have between reporting what could be considered helpful information that I buy into versus really impinging on my sense of privacy. So we'd like to, again, as a challenge for this robot, think about not just how we might be able to interact with a robot, how we might use this to facilitate social interactions. So there's a really nice desktop robot that's being deployed in New York right now. In fact, you can actually get it paid for by the government. And it's been determined through studies that this robot is particularly successful with older women who are living alone, who are lower income. And they find that those women really experience loneliness, and they find that talking with a robot actually decreases their feeling of loneliness, makes them feel more present. But at the same time, those designers were very conscious that you don't want to have a situation where people use a robot as a crotch, right? So whenever you can, this particular robot suggests games of bingo with other users of other people who are in their own homes with their robot. And so we'd like to see if there's an analogy to that with being out and being able to walk with other people and make connections between other people, not just you and your robot. But when there is no one around, just like it's important to exercise your body muscles, it's really important to exercise your social muscles. Again, that's very much linked with causes for dementia as well. It's how social you are. So we think that this may be an area where AI can help. I just want to also mention that we have some other potential SOAR projects. So this is just one area that we're looking at. Walking is a really great, easy, low impact activity for older adults. But people also love dancing. So Steve's got some ideas around how we could actually have a safe dance environment for seniors, and maybe some kind of like almost like a capsule for somebody to dance in. That is also an activity that requires motivation. You could have, I guess, a silent disco where you dance by yourself, but it's more fun to do with other people. So we're looking at robotics for dancing, robotics for emotional support, and we've gotten interested recently in robotics for creativity. How are we doing for time? Okay, I'm going to not go, I'm going to do one last slide. We have other projects going on at the Stanford Robotics Center around maybe more assistive robotics technologies that we won't talk about today, but there's a lot of exciting work that's happening. I'm just going to mention two other collaborations that we have on the SOAR front. One is with the Italian Institute of Technology. They have, that's definitely not, I guess you could call it a humanoid, certainly an early version of a humanoid robot called the iCup. There's kind of a visceral reaction that some people have to it, but they have found that this robot works really well with kids who have autism to practice social skills. And one of the theories as to why that works well is because that robot is clearly not a human, does not come with all the baggage that a human brings. There's not all the other things you need to attend to. So they have found that this robot works well at delivering cognitive therapy exercises, social skills exercises to kids with autism. So we are entering into a collaboration with them to explore at the other end of the lifespan, might adults with cognitive impairment also benefit from doing cognitive exercises with a robot? And then again, Steve showed earlier that robot from Enchanted Tools. That robot came to visit us. That's a dinner we did with members of the senior community and Stanford faculty, again, looking at how we can get people's feedback early on different robot designs. And that particular robot is now hanging out in the Stanford Robotics Center. We're learning a lot about how people respond to it. So I'm going to wrap up there so that Steve and I can take questions. And also, if anyone wants to come try the robot, again, it doesn't know who you are. It's using cameras. So if anyone wants to try it, you just come, stand in front of it, press the ring, and you can take it for a little loop.
Great, thank you. Let's spend a few minutes asking Michelle and see questions. Questions for you guys?
Yeah, so obviously with using robotics or any sort of new technology in such like a sensitive region as like elder care, just like adjacent to all sorts of social stuff, but also just like safety of the people involved. Do you see it as mostly a like technology problem or a PR problem of getting over the kind of like public perception hurdle in integrating these new technologies with participants in various ways? It's like if you make the technology good enough, do you think kind of public perception will just naturally gravitate towards it, or is it going to be like a combination effort between making the technology better and actually like public outcome efforts?
Yeah, can I have a third option? So I mean, I think there's a lot about basically, I mean, it comes down to human-robot interaction and social interactions. So can we find ways aren't just necessarily technological, but ways that robots fit into our the way we live our lives, and to how we can make new connections. So I think that if a robot is something that is being used, I think some of these continuing care communities are a great first place, because you can have kind of collective use of the robot. And I think that will help to make it more acceptable. But I mean, I think it's all of the above though, really, right? I mean, we know that you'd be better off. Well, walkers actually have an ergonomic problem. So a walker is really not the best solution for mobility challenges. Why is it that people don't want to walk with a walker? I mean, if you want to call that a PR problem, or I think it's really about the way we're perceived. And that becomes really important. Karen, you want to say anything about that?
I think I'm an idealist, so I think, I hope that people will use things when it makes sense for them to use them. I don't think we can, as technologists, if we push, that often leads to bad outcomes. But it doesn't mean that you don't create solutions for people. You just have to make sure that you are taking the people's perspective in as you listen to it. And, you know, I joked about, you know, kids asking if they want robots to do their homework. But this is actually a real problem. You can't just ask people what they want. You have to iterate. You have to try things and see how they react to them. I took the group, the Stanford Robotics Center staff, up to San Francisco and made us all take Waymos, right? There were people, I think you were one of them, who were like, oh, I'm not sure I like this idea of Waymo. We came away with like, everybody was like, oh, this is actually a great experience. But your going in position is, I'm not sure I want that thing driving for me. I don't trust it, right? And until you actually experience it, then you can learn to trust it. And so how do you get over that? Is it a marketing problem? Maybe it's a marketing problem. Maybe it's just an experience problem. Maybe it's if you need the solution, right? If I feel like I don't need a Waymo, I can just take an Uber, right? Or I can just drive myself, or I can take the bus, right? I'm comfortable with those things. So getting people to change is always hard. And so it is a marketing problem, but it's also, I say, as an idealist, I think we should be able to build solutions that are better, and eventually people will realize that they're better. But they have to truly be better, right? It can't be just, I have this cool idea and I built this cool technology and now you should all use it. Like, I love this little robot. It's so much fun to have. And I also think it's not a great product, right? Like, it doesn't, what does it do for, like, I wouldn't buy one of these for my house, right? It's got a little tiny compartment. I don't need it, right? And it's, when I go for a walk with it, I have to go to all the curb cuts. I have to find the curb cuts. I would just step down the curb, but I have to take the long way around. So I have one of these in my office. I could take it anytime instead of, you know, carrying my backpack, but I don't take it, right? Because I don't need it. So, you know, but somebody else might need it, right? And so at some different point in time.
So let's go. We've got another couple of questions. Yeah, I want to interrupt and say, next week, a week from today, we'll have Andrew Chatham from Waymo talking about exactly this problem.
Great.
Other questions? Yes.
When you think about the internship use case, how important is form factor to the person be able to borrow as like one end where it's very focused on form factor itself? In my work with it, people really like the tactile nature of it, all the way to like character AI, where there is no enjoy engaging with the actual personality. So like, what do you think people are gravitating most there?
I think Michelle hit a little on it with when you embody something and it comes into your space, it's harder to ignore. And so there's something nice about that, or something consistent about that. But it is the case when I put up the it was kind of say, you don't need necessarily the screen. You don't need all these motors to have something moving around. If all it's doing is talking to you, you have to somehow overcome the cost of those extra degrees of freedom, those extra motors, the extra, you know, complexity of the system. You have to provide value that's commensurate with the cost. And that's really not trivial, like to think about what you can do. So a lot of people are saying, oh, well, humanoid is the thing because humanoid robots can do everything that humans can do, and they're going to be cheap someday. Well, it's relative to what, right? And they're not going to be $500. They're not going to be cell phone costs. Cell phone will always be much, much cheaper. But they'll be able to walk around and move. So at what point, you know, what exactly do you need? And I think this is the fire problem. I think it changed.
When do you believe that they do reach this like mature technology stage, how do you plan on like scaling this because I think my perception at least is like China, for instance, that like the lithium, the batteries, all that is infrastructure over there. Like, what's the plan for that? Like, would they be manufactured here once they're at scale, or?
That's a good question. It's beyond the robotics question. It's the same thing about all kinds of technologies. I think, we have a game called Monopoly for a reason, right? People realize that, if you get a monopoly, you have some advantage. China's realizing that certain things around manufacturing, supply chain. It doesn't mean that they'll have it forever. It doesn't mean that lithium-ion battery is not the only way to power things. It's the current way. And there's a trap of assuming that whatever I have right now is how it's going to be in the future. We're pretty good as a species, I would say, at coming up with creative solutions to problems. Listening to a book about, going back to Malthus, Thomas Malthus, right? He said, look at the rate of growth, the way to feed people, and look at the growth of the population, millions will die, right? People are all going to starve to death if we keep having babies. And it turned out not to be the case, right? We were able to move along, solve problems. So, again, I tend to be an optimist. I tend to go with that.